Sophia Matthews stood at her office window on the 42nd floor, watching the golden sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in breathtaking hues of amber and rose. Her reflection showed a woman at the peak of her career, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair swept into a precise chignon, success written in every confident line of her posture. At 38, she had everything she'd ever wanted: a prestigious position as senior financial analyst at Morrison & Green, a loving husband, and a life that seemed to sparkle as brightly as the city lights beginning to twinkle below. If only she could shake the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. She turned back to her desk, where the latest quarterly reports from Stellar Innovations lay spread before her. The numbers were impressive, almost too impressive. Sophia had spent 15 years honing her instincts in the financial sector, and something about these figures made her skin prickle with unease. Burning the midnight oil again? Sophia looked up to see Mr. Green himself standing in her doorway, his silver hair and expensive suit a perfect match for the corporate aesthetic he'd cultivated over 3 decades. There was something in his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just reviewing the Stellar portfolio," she replied, careful to keep her voice neutral. "Their growth projections are interesting." "Interesting is good," Green said, his tone carefully measured. "We need interesting in this market. Speaking of which, I heard your husband's firm landed their new development contract." "Congratulations." Sophia's hand froze over the papers. "I'm sorry. The Riverside project? Eric's firm got the bid, didn't he mention it?" Green's expression was impossible to read. "Small world, isn't it? Stellar's new headquarters, quite a feather in his cap." The gnawing feeling in Sophia's stomach transformed into a cold, hard knot. Eric hadn't mentioned anything about landing a new contract, let alone one connected to Stellar Innovations. They shared everything, or at least, she thought they did. Every evening over dinner, they talked about their days, their challenges, their victories. Just last night, he'd been discussing a small renovation project, nothing like the scale of a corporate headquarters. Yes, she managed, quite a coincidence. After Green left, Sophia sat in the growing darkness, her mind racing. She pulled up her private files, the confidential analyses she'd been working on for months. The Stellar Innovations deal was massive, potentially career-making. She'd discussed aspects of it with Eric, of course. They'd been married for 12 years, and she trusted him implicitly. But now, her phone buzzed with a text from Eric, "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." Sophia stared at the message, remembering all the little things she'd dismissed over the past few months. The late nights. The whispered phone calls. The sudden interest in her work with Stellar. The way he changed the subject whenever she brought up their finances. She began to dig deeper into Stellar's records, cross-referencing dates and transactions. As midnight approached, patterns emerged that made her blood run cold. Someone had been feeding information to Stellar's competitors, specific, detailed information that she'd only shared with Eric. The perfect life she'd built was starting to crack, and through those cracks, she could see shadows that terrified her. Sophia packed up her laptop with trembling hands. Tomorrow, she would begin her own investigation. But tonight, she needed to go home and look her husband in the eye. She needed to see if she could spot the moment when he would lie to her face. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Eric, "Great news about the contract. We should celebrate this weekend." Sophia's fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. He didn't know she knew. She had the advantage, for now. The question was, what would she do with it? The doors opened to the empty lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Each step took her closer to confronting the possibility that the man she loved, the life she'd built, might all be an elaborate facade. And behind that facade lurked something that could destroy not just her marriage, but her entire career. As she stepped into the cool night air, Sophia made a decision. She would play along, watch, and wait. But when she finally moved, it would be with the precision and ruthlessness that had made her one of Wall Street's rising stars. After all, she hadn't gotten where she was by being naive. The house was dark when Sophia arrived home, save for the soft glow of Eric's study lamp spilling into the hallway. She paused in the doorway, watching her husband's silhouette as he hunched over his desk, completely absorbed in his work. For a moment, she saw him as she had 12 years ago, the brilliant young architect with passionate eyes and dreams too big for his modest startup firm. The man who had promised to build their life together, brick by careful brick. Now she wondered if those bricks had been made of lies. "You're home late," Eric said without looking up, his voice warm with familiar affection. The same voice that had whispered, "I love you," countless times, that had shared dreams and secrets over morning coffee. The same voice that had apparently been keeping secrets that could destroy them both. Sophia set her briefcase down with deliberate care. "Interesting day at the office," she said, measuring each word. "Mr. Green mentioned your firm's new contract." There it was, the barely perceptible tension in Eric's shoulders, the fraction of a second too long before he turned to face her. "I was going to surprise you," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "The Riverside project is huge, Sophia. It's everything we've been working for. Everything we've been working for." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. She walked to his desk, noting how he subtly angled his computer screen away from her view. "Tell me, Eric, how exactly did your firm land the Stellar Innovations contract?" "It was a competitive bid," he said quickly, too quickly. "Our design proposal was innovative, sustainable. They loved our vision for their new headquarters." Sophia picked up a framed photo from his desk, their wedding day, both of them laughing as they fed each other cake. Did they love it as much as they loved the inside information about their competitors' real estate strategies? The confidential market analyses? The projected expansion plans that only their rival's senior financial analyst would know about? The photo slipped from her fingers, the glass shattering against the hardwood floor. In the sudden silence, Eric's sharp intake of breath seemed deafening. "Sophia, I can explain." "Can you?" Her voice was steady, even as her world tilted on its axis. "Can you explain why our joint account is suddenly missing 6 figures? Or why you've been taking calls in the bathroom at midnight? Or why Stellar's competitors somehow knew exactly when to undercut their property acquisitions?" Eric stood, his face ashen. "You don't understand. The firm was in trouble. The pandemic hit us hard, and then the market crashed. I had gambling debts. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Sophia's laugh was hollow. "By committing corporate espionage? By using my trust, my career, my reputation as collateral for your lies?" "They approached me 6 months ago," Eric said, his words tumbling out now. "They knew about the debts. They said they could make them disappear if I just helped them understand the market better. It seemed harmless at first. Just general information, nothing specific. But then they wanted more, and they knew too much about me, about us." Sophia's mind raced through the implications. 6 months. Half a year of compromised data, of tainted analyses, of unwittingly betraying her own client's trust. Her professional reputation, the one thing she'd built entirely on her own, was balanced on a knife's edge. "How much?" she demanded. "How much did they pay you to sell me out? Sophia, please. How much?" "2 million, he whispered. "Plus the contract. They said once the headquarters project was complete, we'd be free and clear." Sophia walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city lights blurred through unshed tears. "There is no we anymore, Eric. You made that choice 6 months ago. What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sophia thought of her career, of the years she'd spent building her reputation, of the trust she'd earned from clients and colleagues. She thought of the illegal transactions hiding in plain sight, of the paper trail that could lead straight to her door. She thought of revenge. "I haven't decided yet," she said finally, turning to face the stranger who wore her husband's face. "But I suggest you don't leave town. And don't warn your friends at Stellar. Because whatever happens next, I promise you won't see it coming." As she walked out of the study, leaving Eric standing amid the shattered glass of their wedding photo, Sophia felt something crystallize within her. The pain was still there, a raw wound where her heart should be, but alongside it was something else, determination. Steel beneath silk. She had built herself once, from nothing. She could do it again. But first, she had some digging to do. Because if Eric thought he could betray her and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating his wife. Morning light filtered through the guest room blinds, painting stripes across Sophia's untouched bed. She hadn't slept, spending the night instead examining her life with the same meticulous attention she usually reserved for financial analyses. Each memory now required reassessment, each shared moment needed to be reevaluated through the lens of betrayal. The woman who stared back at her from the bathroom mirror was both familiar and strange, like a photograph slightly out of focus. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but there was something else there too, a hardness she'd never noticed before, as if the night had crystallized something within her. "I made coffee," Eric said when she entered the kitchen, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a hostage negotiator. He stood by the counter, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking as though he'd aged a decade overnight. "Sophia, we need to talk about this rationally." Rationally. The word echoed in her mind like a bitter joke. How rational was it to discover that your entire life was built on quicksand? She accepted the coffee anyway, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, the same one he'd given her last Christmas, with "World's Best Wife" printed in cheerful letters. The irony wasn't lost on her. "You're right," she said, surprising them both. "We do need to talk rationally. Tell me everything." As Eric spoke, Sophia watched him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. He detailed the gambling debts, the initial approach from Stellar's competitors, the gradual escalation of their demands. With each word, she felt herself splitting in two, the wife who wanted to scream and shatter every piece of their carefully curated life, and the analyst who saw patterns emerging, opportunities hidden within the chaos. "They have everything documented," Eric finished, his voice hollow. "Every piece of information I passed along, every transaction. If this comes out, we'll both be ruined." "No," Sophia corrected quietly. "I'll be ruined. You'll just be another corporate spy who got caught. But I'm the one whose signature is on those analyses, whose reputation is tied to every compromised report." She stood, smoothing her skirt with steady hands. "I'm going to work. You're going to stay here and write down every contact, every meeting, every piece of information you shared. When I get home, we'll discuss our options." Eric reached for her hand. "Sophia, please. I know I destroyed your trust, but I never stopped loving you." She looked at his familiar fingers, remembering how they used to trace patterns on her skin late at night, how they'd intertwined with hers through every celebration and crisis of their marriage. Now they felt like strangers' hands. "Love," she said carefully, "is not a defense I can present to the SEC." At the office, Sophia moved through her day like an actress in a well-rehearsed play. She smiled at colleagues, attended meetings, and analyzed reports with mechanical precision. But beneath the surface, her mind was working overtime, examining angles, calculating risks, searching for leverage. During her lunch break, she made 2 calls. The first was to a private investigator recommended by her most discreet colleague. The second was to a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. "Mrs. Matthews," the attorney said after hearing a carefully edited version of her situation, "what you're describing could be catastrophic, for everyone involved. My advice would be to gather evidence and consider approaching the authorities first. A cooperative witness has more options. Sophia thanked her and ended the call, adding another piece to the puzzle forming in her mind. By the time she left the office that evening, she had the outline of a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't legal, but it might be her only chance to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. Mr. Green stopped her as she was leaving. Sophia, excellent work on the stellar analysis. Though I couldn't help noticing some interesting patterns in their competitors' movements. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Sophia knew. Green wasn't just aware of the information leak, he was part of it. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of calm, like a chess player who finally understands the game being played. Patterns are my specialty, she replied smoothly. I'd be happy to discuss them in detail tomorrow. As she rode the elevator down, Sophia allowed herself a small smile. She had been playing defense, reacting to each new revelation. But now it was time to change the game. Eric, Green, Stellar, they all thought they knew what she would do, how she would respond. They saw the polished professional, the devoted wife, the reliable analyst who played by the rules. They had no idea who she really was. Because while they had been busy underestimating her, Sophia had made a discovery of her own. Sometimes the most dangerous player isn't the one holding all the cards, it's the one with nothing left to lose. Sophia sat in her parked car outside their home, her home, watching shadows lengthen across the manicured lawn. The house she'd once seen as a symbol of their success now felt like an elaborate stage set, every perfectly chosen detail part of an intricate deception. Even the garden she'd spent weekends tending seemed to mock her with its carefully maintained facade. The private investigator's report lay heavy in her briefcase. She'd spent the afternoon in a quiet cafe, absorbing each devastating detail with the same composure she'd use reviewing quarterly reports. But beneath that practiced calm, something fundamental had shifted within her. The gambling hadn't been the beginning. There were other women, 3 of them, scattered across the past 5 years like landmines in her memories. Business trips that now made terrible sense. Late nights that had nothing to do with architecture. But it was the financial web that truly took her breath away, shell companies, hidden accounts, a pattern of deception so elaborate it could only have been years in the making. "You fool," she whispered to her reflection in the rearview mirror. "You brilliant, blind fool." Inside, Eric was waiting in the kitchen, a glass of her favorite wine already poured. The sight of it, this calculated gesture of normalcy, almost broke her composure. How many evenings had they spent here, sharing wine and dreams, while he wove his web of lies? "I've written everything down," he said, pushing a thick folder across the counter. "Every contact, every meeting. I know it doesn't make up for what I've done, but it's a start." Sophia took the folder without opening it. "Tell me something, Eric. The woman in Chicago, Jennifer Crane. Was she part of the plan from the beginning, or did that just happen naturally?" The color drained from his face. "How did you laugh about it with her?" The trusting wife back home, so busy with her career she never noticed the signs. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational. "Or maybe you justified it. After all, I was always working late, always focused on the next big deal. Perhaps I drove you to it." "Sophia, those mistakes, they didn't mean anything. This isn't about." "No," she cut him off, "this is exactly what it's about. Because I finally understand. The insider trading, the gambling, the affairs, they're all symptoms of the same disease. You're addicted to deception, Eric. The thrill of getting away with it, of being clever enough to fool everyone. Even me." She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Especially me." Eric took a step toward her, then stopped, something in her expression giving him pause. "What are you going to do?" Sophia opened her briefcase and removed a second folder, thicker than his, bound in leather. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman who spent 15 years learning to read between the lines of corporate reports, to spot patterns others missed, to follow money through the darkest corners of the financial world. A woman who was so good at her job that no one, not even her husband, realized she'd been building her own safety net, piece by quiet piece. She opened the folder, revealing documents, photographs, and flash drives. Did you really think I kept all my insights, all my discoveries, in the office where Green could access them? That I didn't have my own network of contacts, my own sources of information? What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow morning, a very detailed report about Stellar's irregular activities will reach the SEC. Not from me, I'm far too compromised. It will come from a network of anonymous sources, all pointing to a complex conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of several corporations. Mr. Green, your friends at Stellar, even that ambitious young partner at your firm, they're all about to have a very interesting day. You can't, Eric whispered. They'll destroy us. No, Sophia corrected him gently, they'll destroy you. Because while you were all so busy orchestrating your clever schemes, I was building something else, a paper trail showing that I was being systematically deceived and manipulated. Every late-night office access, every unauthorized data transfer, every suspicious transaction, all documented, all pointing away from me. She stood, smoothing her skirt with the same precise gesture she'd used that morning. But now it felt different, no longer armor, but power. The SEC investigation will take months, possibly years. By the time it's over, careers will be ruined, reputations shattered. But I'll emerge as the whistleblower who tried to stop it, the loyal employee who was betrayed by those she trusted most. It's amazing what people will believe when you give them a story they want to hear. The truth hit Eric like a physical blow. You're not just gathering evidence, he said slowly. You're setting us all up. Sophia picked up her wine glass, studying the way light played through the dark liquid. Consider it a compliment, darling. After all, I learned from the best. As she walked away, leaving Eric standing in their beautiful kitchen surrounded by the ruins of his schemes, Sophia felt something she hadn't expected, peace. Because finally, after all these years of playing by others' rules, she was writing her own story. And this time, she would be the author of her own redemption. The morning Sophia chose to implement her plan dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that only follows a sleepless night. She stood before her closet, selecting her armor with deliberate care, a charcoal Armani suit that spoke of understated power, pearl earrings that had been a gift to herself after her first major promotion. Each choice was a statement, not to others, but to herself. The guest room had become her sanctuary over the past week, a space where she could shed the weight of pretense. Here, surrounded by papers and plans, she had methodically reconstructed herself, piece by piece, like a master artisan rebuilding a shattered vase into something stronger, more beautiful for having been broken. You don't have to do this, Eric said from the doorway, his voice carrying the hoarse edge of someone who'd spent the night wrestling with demons of his own making. We could find another way. Sophia continued applying her lipstick, the precise strokes a meditation in control. There is no we anymore, Eric. That's something you still don't understand. This isn't about saving our marriage or protecting your reputation. This is about survival, mine. The drive to the office felt different today. Each familiar landmark seemed sharper, more significant, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Sophia had spent years learning to read the subtle rhythms of Wall Street, the invisible currents that moved beneath its gleaming surface. Now she was about to create a ripple that would become a wave. Mr. Green was already in his office when she arrived, his casual pose betraying nothing of the tension she knew he must be feeling. The SEC's preliminary inquiries would have reached him by now, careful, probing questions that seemed random but formed a pattern only she could see. Sophia, he greeted her warmly. Join me for coffee? She accepted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They played their parts perfectly, the concerned mentor, the dedicated protégé, while beneath the surface, both calculated moves and countermoves. "I've been reviewing those patterns we discussed," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "I think you'll find the implications fascinating." Green's fingers tensed almost imperceptibly as he opened the folder. Inside were copies of emails, transaction records, meeting notes, a carefully curated selection that pointed to his involvement without directly implicating her. Each document was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that would only become clear when it was too late to stop what was coming. "Interesting analysis," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Though I wonder if you've considered all the potential consequences of pursuing this line of inquiry." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "I always consider the consequences, Mr. Green. It's what makes me good at my job." The rest of the morning unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Sophia attended meetings, answered emails, reviewed reports, all while her real work happened in the background. Anonymous tips continued to reach regulators, each one adding another piece to the puzzle she'd designed. By lunch, the first whispers of an investigation were circulating through the office. In the afternoon, she received a text from Eric. "They're asking questions at the firm. What have you done?" She didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the conference room where she knew Green was meeting with Stellar's executives. Through the glass walls, she could see the tension in their postures, the way they leaned forward over scattered papers like generals planning a desperate campaign. One of them looked up and saw her watching. She smiled, lifted her coffee cup in a small salute, and walked away. Let them wonder. Let them second-guess every interaction, every piece of information they thought they controlled. As the day drew to a close, Sophia received an email from her attorney confirming that everything was in place. The documentation she'd carefully assembled over the past week, evidence of her own unwitting involvement, proof of how her trust had been manipulated, was now safely in the hands of those who could protect her interests. She shut down her computer and gathered her things, conscious of the watching eyes, the whispered conversations that stopped when she passed. The mask of professional composure never slipped, but inside, she felt an unfamiliar sensation building, not satisfaction, exactly, but something closer to peace. In the elevator, her phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number. "We should talk tomorrow. Usual place." Sophia smiled. Right on schedule. Because what none of them understood, not Eric, not Green, not the executives frantically trying to contain the damage, was that tomorrow's meeting wasn't an opportunity for negotiation. It was the final piece of her design, the moment when all her careful preparation would crystallize into something none of them could have anticipated. They thought they were arranging a meeting to discuss terms. She was arranging their surrender. As she drove home through the gathering dusk, Sophia felt the weight of years of careful pretense falling away. The woman who had played by their rules, who had built her career on being predictable and reliable, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that true power lies not in the cards you hold, but in how willing you are to upset the entire table. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. But for Sophia, it felt more like a beginning. The cafe where everything would end was the same one where Sophia had first met Eric 15 years ago. She arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table that offered a clear view of both entrances. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors, the same floors where she had once spilled her coffee when Eric first made her laugh. How fitting that it should end where it began. She ordered a cappuccino and watched the steam rise in delicate spirals, remembering countless morning meetings in this same space. Each one had been a small compromise, a tiny erosion of her boundaries that she hadn't even noticed happening. But that was the nature of loss, wasn't it? Sometimes the most significant changes happened so gradually you didn't see them until you were standing in the ruins of what used to be. They arrived together, Eric, Green, and two men she recognized as Stellar's senior executives. Their entrance carried the forced casualness of men who thought they still held the upper hand. Sophia allowed herself a moment of quiet appreciation for their confidence. It was, after all, the same confidence that had led them to underestimate her from the beginning. "Sophia," Green began as they settled into their seats, his tone carefully modulated to convey both authority and concern. "I think we all agree this situation has gotten out of hand. But there's still time to find a reasonable solution." She took a slow sip of her coffee, savoring the moment. "A reasonable solution," she repeated softly. "Like the one you offered Eric when you discovered his gambling debts? Or perhaps like the arrangement you made with Jennifer Crane when she threatened to expose her role in the information leaks?" The slight widening of Green's eyes told her everything. "How did you know about Jennifer?" Sophia placed her cup down with precise care. "The same way I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the shell companies in Delaware, and the very interesting series of property transactions that link everything back to your board of directors." She smiled. "I am, after all, very good at pattern recognition." One of the stellar executives, Thompson, she remembered, leaned forward. "Whatever you think you know, you're just as implicated as anyone else. Your analyses, your reports. Were all compromised without my knowledge," Sophia interrupted smoothly. She opened her briefcase and removed a single manila envelope. "As the SEC will discover when they receive this complete documentation of how my work was systematically altered after submission. The digital trail is quite compelling, especially the parts showing unauthorized access to my files using credentials that, interestingly enough, trace back to your private server." The color drained from Thompson's face. Eric started to speak, but Sophia held up her hand, silencing him with a gesture that felt like closing a book. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used in countless boardroom presentations. "In approximately 30 minutes, federal agents will receive an anonymous tip about this meeting. They'll find us here, having what appears to be a tense discussion about corporate improprieties. I'll be cooperative, shocked, and most importantly, grateful that my conscience finally forced me to come forward." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You'll all be arrested, of course. The evidence against you is overwhelming. But in the chaos and media circus that follows, certain documents might get overlooked. Documents that could make the difference between a negotiated plea and a lengthy prison term." "You're blackmailing us," Green said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. "No," Sophia corrected him. "I'm offering you the same choice you offered my husband, survival at a price. The only difference is, I'm being honest about it." The next 20 minutes were spent in terse negotiation, the details of surrender dressed up in corporate language and legal terminology. Sophia watched them grasp at their last illusions of control with something close to pity. They still didn't understand that they had lost the moment they had taught her how to play their game. When the federal agents arrived, everything unfolded exactly as she had choreographed. The arrests were quiet, dignified, no dramatic scenes to attract unnecessary attention. Sophia played her role perfectly, the dedicated professional whose trust had been betrayed, whose cooperation would prove instrumental in unraveling years of corporate corruption. Hours later, after the statements had been taken and the dust had begun to settle, Sophia stood alone in her office, packing the personal items she had accumulated over 15 years. Her resignation would be announced tomorrow, a principled decision to step away from a tainted institution. Her reputation would remain intact, even enhanced by her role in exposing the scandal. As she placed the last photo in her box, not of Eric, but of herself at her graduation, young and fiercely ambitious, Sophia felt something she hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for the betrayal or the pain, but for the woman she had become because of them. The woman who had learned that true strength wasn't in never being broken, but in choosing how to rebuild yourself from the pieces. The sky was turning to dusk as she left the building for the last time, the city lights beginning their nightly dance against the darkening horizon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to test the strength she had discovered in herself. But for now, Sophia Matthews walked through the gathering darkness with her head high, carrying not the weight of what she had lost, but the power of what she had found. Sometimes, she had learned, the most important victories weren't in destroying your enemies, but in refusing to let them destroy who you were meant to become. The end.